The crystalline spires of Hythera Academy of Sciences pierced the perpetual twilight sky, their geometric perfection reflecting the equally ordered minds of those who dwelled within. Tahlan stood at the edge of the observation deck, his slender fingers tracing the outline of Earth on the stellar map projected before him. His silver eyes, characteristic of all Hytherans, reflected the holographic image as he contemplated the curious species that inhabited the blue planet. Emotional creatures, he murmured to himself, the words carrying no inflection in the cold air, fascinating in their irrationality. As the senior psychology scholar at the Academy, Tahlan had dedicated his life to understanding the peculiar phenomenon of human emotions. The recent establishment of diplomatic relations between Earth and Hythera had opened unprecedented research opportunities, and tomorrow he would embark on his first official mission to Earth, a 6-month stay at the Venice Global Research Center. He closed the projection with a precise gesture and turned toward the crystalline corridors of the Academy. The transparent walls reflected his tall, lean figure as he moved with measured steps. Like all Hytherans, his skin held a pale blue tint that contrasted with his silver-white hair, evolutionary adaptations to their ice-covered world. The Academy halls were silent save for the occasional soft hum of quantum processors. Few Hytherans lingered in common areas. Socialization without purpose was considered inefficient. Tahlan made his way to his private laboratory, where his research on human emotional responses awaited finalization before his departure. As the laboratory door sealed behind him, Tahlan allowed himself a moment of contemplation. His latest experiments had yielded unexpected results, anomalies in his own neurological patterns when exposed to certain Earth cultural artifacts, particularly their music. The complex vibrations of what humans called cello produced peculiar reactions in his cerebral cortex that defied Hytheran psychological models. He had hidden these findings from the reasoning council. Such anomalies could be interpreted as signs of emotional contamination, a condition strictly monitored and corrected in Hytheran society. Emotions were considered primitive evolutionary vestiges, purged from their species through centuries of genetic engineering and social conditioning. Logic and reason were the pillars of their civilization, having lifted them from barbarism to interstellar capability. Yet something about the human capacity for emotion intrigued Tahlan beyond scientific curiosity. When he listened to Earth's music or viewed their art, he experienced something, a resonance, an echo in an empty chamber that should not exist. If my species is incapable of love, he whispered to the empty laboratory, why does my heart still resonate? The question itself was dangerously illogical. Hytherans did not whisper to themselves. They did not question established science, and they certainly did not use metaphorical references to hearts resonating. Tahlan quickly composed himself and began methodically organizing his research materials for transport. His private reflections were irrelevant, likely just neural artifacts from extended exposure to human cultural data. Tomorrow, he would begin proper field research with actual human subjects. The anomalies would be explained, categorized, and filed away. Science would prevail, as it always did on Hythera. The Earth atmospheric entry sequence completed precisely as calculated. Tahlan observed the approaching cityscape of New Venice with detached interest as his transport vessel glided toward the research center's landing platform. The human architectural aesthetic was chaotic, yet somehow harmonious, a contradiction that epitomized much about their species. Unlike the strict geometric patterns of Hytheran crystal architecture, New Venice was a blend of preserved historical structures and modern innovations. Ancient stone buildings stood alongside transparent aerogel towers, canals, once simple waterways, now glowed with bioluminescent organisms genetically engineered to purify the water while providing ambient lighting. "Scholar Talin," the human pilot addressed him. "Welcome to Earth. We'll be docking in approximately 3 minutes. Your liaison will meet you at the arrival terminal." Talin acknowledged with a slight nod. Human communication was inefficiently verbose, often including unnecessary pleasantries. He had studied their customs extensively and prepared appropriate responses to facilitate working relationships. After docking procedures completed, Talin collected his minimal belongings and exited the vessel. The immediate sensory input was overwhelming. Warm, humid air, carrying countless organic particles. The sound of water lapping against stone. Human voices calling in multiple languages. And colors. So many colors compared to the monochromatic ice landscapes of Hythera. "Scholar Talin, welcome to New Venice." The voice came from a human female approaching from the terminal building. She was shorter than him, with dark skin and curly black hair cut close to her scalp. Her eyes were a deep brown, a color rarely seen on Hythera, and they displayed what his research identified as warmth. "I am Dr. Maya Okafor, head of Comparative Emotional Studies at the Research Center. I'll be your primary contact during your stay." Talin inclined his head in the formal Hytheran greeting. "Your assistance is appreciated. Dr. Okafor, I look forward to our scientific collaboration." She smiled, another emotional display, and extended her hand. "Please, call me Maya. We're quite informal here." Talin hesitated momentarily. Physical contact between Hytherans was limited to necessary medical procedures or official ceremonies. But he was on Earth now, and anthropological immersion required participation in cultural customs. He extended his hand and clasped hers. The contact lasted precisely 2.4 seconds, but its effect defied temporal measurement. When their skin touched, Talin experienced a sensation unlike anything in his extensive neurological catalog. A warmth spread from the point of contact, racing up his arm and spreading throughout his chest. His heart rate increased by 24%, his pupils dilated, and a cascade of neural activity flared in regions of his brain typically dormant in Hytherans. He withdrew his hand with careful precision, masking the internal chaos. Maya appeared not to notice his reaction, continuing to smile as she gestured toward the terminal building. "Let me show you to your quarters. You must be tired after your journey, though I'm eager to hear about your research. Your papers on cross-species psychological patterns were fascinating." Talin followed, grateful that his extensive training allowed him to maintain outward composure while internally analyzing the unprecedented reaction. No documented case existed of a Hytheran experiencing such physiological responses from simple touch. It was statistically impossible, yet it had occurred. Perhaps Earth's atmospheric composition was affecting his biology, or some electromagnetic anomaly. He would need to conduct private tests to identify the cause. "Your accommodation has been adapted to Hytheran preferences," Maya was explaining as they entered a sleek transport pod that would carry them through the city's pneumatic tube network. Lower temperature, higher oxygen content, and minimal decorative elements. "That is considerate," Talin replied automatically, still cataloging his internal reactions. "Though I hope you'll spend time in our common spaces as well," she continued. "Immersion is the best teacher, especially for someone studying emotional responses." The transport pod accelerated smoothly, carrying them above the ancient canals and modern structures of New Venice. Through the transparent shell, Talin observed humans engaged in various activities, dining together, conversing, embracing, laughing. Each display of emotion was a potential data point for his research. Yet for the first time in his distinguished career, the scientist in him was overshadowed by something else, an observer who did not merely want to document these emotions, but to understand them from within. You seem deep in thought, Maya noted, breaking his contemplation. Talene composed a suitable response. I am evaluating optimal research methodologies given the environmental variables. She laughed softly, a pleasant sound that triggered another unexpected neural response in him. Always the scientist. I think you'll find that some of the most valuable insights come when you're not actively researching. An illogical statement. Yet Talon could not formulate a proper rebuttal. Instead, he found himself wondering what other insights Dr. Maya Okafor might offer during his stay on this strange, warm planet, so different from his crystalline home. Over the following weeks, Talon established a rigorous research routine at the Venice Global Research Center. During official hours, he conducted interviews with human subjects, monitored their physiological responses to various stimuli, and compared the data with Hytheran baseline measurements. His findings were methodically documented and transmitted back to the Academy on Hythera. But in the privacy of his quarters, he conducted a parallel study, one focused on his own anomalous responses. The initial reaction to Maya's touch had not been an isolated incident. Each subsequent interaction with her produced similar, though less intense, physiological changes. More concerning were the cognitive effects, a preoccupation with their conversations, anticipation of their scheduled meetings, and involuntary replaying of their interactions during rest periods. These symptoms matched human descriptions of attraction, a primitive emotional state tied to mating behaviors. The very concept was absurd. Hytherans had evolved beyond such biological imperatives centuries ago. Reproduction was a clinical process, scientifically optimized for genetic diversity and beneficial traits. The notion that he could experience attraction was as preposterous as suggesting a quantum computer could feel loneliness. Yet the data was irrefutable. Something was happening to him, and rather than reporting this dangerous anomaly to the Reasoning Council as protocol demanded, Talene found himself collecting more data, conducting more tests, seeking to understand rather than eliminate these experiences. On the 23rd day of his Earth assignment, Maya invited him to attend a musical performance, a chamber orchestra featuring the very instrument that had first triggered his anomalous responses on Hythera. The cello soloist is world-renowned, Maya explained as they walked through the evening streets of New Venice. I remembered you mentioned studying human music in your preliminary research. Talene had not mentioned his particular interest in the cello, yet her selection was remarkably aligned with his undocumented studies. Your suggestion is appreciated. Direct exposure will provide valuable observational data. The concert hall was an ancient structure, renovated with modern acoustics while preserving its historical aesthetics. Curved wooden panels lined the walls, and soft golden lighting created what humans would call an intimate atmosphere. Talene noted approximately 200 humans seated in concentric semicircles around a central stage. As they took their seats, Maya leaned slightly closer. Have you ever experienced live music before? Negative. Hytheran sonic arts are entirely digital and optimized for information density rather than emotional response. She smiled, a gesture he was becoming increasingly attuned to. Then you're in for something special. When the musicians entered and the first notes filled the hall, Talene understood the inadequacy of his previous research. The recordings he had studied on Hythera were mere shadows of this experience. The vibrations did not merely enter through his auditory system. They seemed to penetrate his entire body, creating resonance patterns that activated neural pathways he had not known existed. The cello soloist drew her bow across the strings, producing a sound so rich with what humans called sorrow that Talene felt a physical pressure in his chest. As the melody evolved, transitioning to what his research identified as hope, the pressure transformed into an expansive sensation, as though his ribcage were insufficient to contain what was growing within. Without conscious decision, his hand moved to cover the center of his chest. The gesture was utterly unhitheren, emotive, unnecessary, illogical. Maya noticed. Her eyes met his, and she placed her own hand over her heart in silent understanding. The music continued, weaving complex emotional narratives without a single word. Tahlin experienced the entire performance in a state of heightened awareness. His usually ordered mind overwhelmed by sensations that defied categorization. When the final note faded and the audience erupted in applause, Tahlin found himself unable to move. The customary appreciative gestures seemed inadequate to acknowledge what had just transpired. "What did you feel?" Maya asked quietly as the audience began to disperse. The question was both simple and impossible. Hitherans did not feel in the human sense. They observed, analyzed, and concluded. Yet Tahlin heard himself respond. "Everything. I felt. Everything." His admission was dangerous, a confession of emotional contamination that would mandate immediate intervention if reported to the Reasoning Council. But in that moment, seated beside Maya in the lingering resonance of the music, the danger seemed distant and irrelevant. She reached out, her fingers lightly touching the back of his hand. That's the power of art. Tahlin. It creates a bridge between minds, even minds as different as ours. The touch, combined with the lingering effects of the music, produced the strongest response yet. Tahlin's visual field momentarily narrowed. His heartbeat accelerated beyond previous parameters, and an unfamiliar sensation of warmth spread across his facial dermal layer. With sudden clarity, he realized he was experiencing what humans called a blush, an involuntary signaling of emotional states that Hitherans had eliminated from their genetic expression eons ago. Yet here it was, manifesting in him, a physiological impossibility. Unless everything he had been taught about Hitheran evolution was incomplete. The following morning, Tahlin received a priority communication from the Reasoning Council. His latest research transmission had triggered an official review, and Council member Eldrith requested an immediate conference. With precise movements masking his internal disquiet, Tahlin activated the quantum entanglement communicator in his private quarters. The holographic projection of Council member Eldrith materialized, tall even by Hitheran standards, with the characteristic silver eyes showing not the slightest hint of emotion. "Scholar Tahlin," she began without preamble, "your most recent data patterns show concerning anomalies." Tahlin maintained a neutral expression. "Please specify the nature of your concerns. Council member." "Your neurological self-scans indicate unusual activity in the limbic region, structures dormant in evolved Hitherans. Additionally, your research questions have deviated from established protocols, focusing excessively on subjective experiences rather than objective measurements." The accusation was precise and damning. The Council's monitoring algorithms had detected patterns in his research that suggested emotional contamination. Such conditions were treated with immediate neural recalibration on Hithera, a process that would erase the affected pathways and return the individual to proper logical functioning. "The anomalies are experimental artifacts," Tahlin stated, employing a technically accurate explanation. "I have been simulating human neural patterns to better understand their emotional responses. The process requires temporary adjustments to my own neural mapping." It was not entirely false. He had indeed been using self-modulation techniques to better comprehend human emotions. What he omitted was that these changes were neither temporary nor fully under his control. Eldrith's expression remained unchanged, but the slight tilt of her head indicated skepticism. "Your dedication to thorough research is acknowledged, Scholar Tahlin. However, the Council recommends immediate caution. Extended immersion in human society presents contamination risks. We are dispatching Observer Keltrin to assist in your research and ensure protocol compliance." The implication was clear. Tahlin was now under suspicion, and Keltrin would serve as both assistant and monitor, reporting directly to the Council. "Observer Keltrin's assistance will be valuable," Tahlin responded, his voice betraying none of the alarm this development caused. "When should I expect his arrival?" 3 Earth days. Until then, minimize unnecessary interaction with human subjects and focus on data analysis. The communication ended, leaving Tahlin in silence. The Council's intervention was a significant complication. Observer Keltrin would detect any emotional responses, and discovery would mean immediate recall to Hythra for neural recalibration, effectively erasing everything he had experienced and learned during his time on Earth. More concerning was the realization that followed: the prospect of losing these new experiences, of returning to his previous state of emotional nullity, was distressing. The very fact that he found it distressing was further evidence of how far he had deviated from Hytheran norms. A signal at his door interrupted his contemplation. Maya stood outside, her expression displaying what his research identified as concern. "Tahlin, we had a meeting scheduled to discuss yesterday's concert experience." He should refuse the meeting, following the Council's directive to minimize human contact. The logical course was clear. Instead, he opened the door. "I apologize for the delay. Dr. Okafor, a communication from Hythra required my attention." She entered his quarters, immediately noting his troubled state despite his efforts to conceal it. "Is everything all right? You seem disturbed." "Hytherans do not become disturbed," he stated automatically, then paused, recognizing the inaccuracy. "However, a complication has arisen. The Reasoning Council is sending an observer to monitor my research. My methodologies have been questioned." Maya's expression shifted to one of alarm. "Because of our interactions? Because of the concert?" "Partially. My neural scans have shown activity patterns inconsistent with Hytheran norms. The Council suspects emotional contamination." "Contamination?" Maya repeated, her voice rising slightly. "They speak of emotions as if they're a disease. From a Hytheran perspective, they are. Emotions led our ancestors to centuries of conflict and irrational behavior. The Great Purification eliminated emotional capacity to create a society based purely on logic and reason." Maya stepped closer, her eyes intense. "And now you're experiencing emotions despite this purification. What does that suggest to you as a scientist? Tahlin?" The question penetrated his defenses. What did it suggest? The logical conclusion was as simple as it was revolutionary: that the purification was incomplete, he said quietly. That emotional capacity remains dormant in Hytheran biology, not eliminated. That under certain conditions, it can be reactivated. "And you're experiencing this reactivation?" Tahlin hesitated, then made a decision that violated every protocol of his training. "Yes. Since our first contact," the handshake upon my arrival, "I have experienced physiological and cognitive responses consistent with human emotional patterns. The effects intensify in your presence and peaked during the musical performance. The admission hung in the air between them, a dangerous truth that could end his career and alter his very identity if discovered by the Council." Maya's response was unexpected. Rather than the scientific curiosity he anticipated, she displayed what appeared to be compassion. "That must be terrifying for you." "Hytherans do not experience fear," he replied automatically, then corrected himself. "But yes, the experience is destabilizing. My entire understanding of self has been compromised." "What will happen when this observer arrives?" "Observer Keltrin will likely detect my condition. Standard protocol would require immediate return to Hithra for neural recalibration, a procedure that would eliminate these new patterns and restore typical Hithran functioning. Maya's expression darkened. They would erase your emotions, your experiences? That's equivalent to partial memory erasure. The Council would consider it correction, not erasure, restoration of proper function. She stepped closer, her proximity triggering another cascade of those very responses he had just confessed to. And is that what you want? Tahlin? To be corrected? The question struck at the core of his emerging internal conflict. Did he want to return to his previous state? The logical Hithran answer was affirmative. Emotional states were inefficient, unpredictable, often painful. Yet the thought of losing these new experiences, of never again feeling the resonance of music or the warmth of Maya's presence. No, he said simply, the single word representing a profound break from everything he had been taught. I do not wish to be corrected. Maya's expression softened. Then we have 3 days to find an alternative. As they began to formulate a plan, Tahlin realized he had crossed a threshold. He was now actively opposing the will of the Reasoning Council, committing to a path that would be considered not just contamination, but outright rebellion. And for the first time in his life, logic was not his primary guide. Over the next 2 days, Tahlin and Maya worked with quiet urgency. During official research hours, they maintained the appearance of normal scientific collaboration, generating sufficient legitimate data to satisfy cursory monitoring. But in private, they pursued a different project altogether, understanding the nature of Tahlin's emotional awakening and finding evidence that might convince the Reasoning Council of its scientific value. Through careful self-examination and Maya's expertise in emotional psychology, they developed a theory. Hithran emotional capacity had never been genetically eliminated, merely suppressed through neural conditioning, reinforced across generations. Certain triggers, particularly novel sensory experiences and meaningful interpersonal connections, could reawaken these dormant pathways. It's like a language, Maya explained as they reviewed Tahlin's neural scans. Your people still have the neurological architecture to speak emotions, but you've lost the vocabulary. Your time on Earth, our interactions, the music. They're teaching you words you didn't know existed. The metaphor was elegant and clarifying. If this hypothesis is correct, other Hithrans could potentially experience similar awakenings under the right conditions. Exactly. This isn't contamination, it's rediscovery of an aspect of Hithran biology that's been suppressed. As they worked, the boundaries between research and personal discovery blurred. Maya shared stories from her own life, experiences of joy, grief, love, and wonder that helped Tahlin contextualize his emerging emotions. In turn, he found himself revealing aspects of Hithran society rarely shared with outsiders: the isolation, the rigid hierarchies, the absence of familial bonds. During a late evening session in Maya's research office, she showed him Earth artifacts that carried emotional significance. A pressed flower from her grandmother's garden, a river stone worn smooth by water, a handwritten note from a childhood friend. These objects, imbued with meaning beyond their physical properties, fascinated Tahlin. On Hithra, objects are valued only for function, he explained, carefully holding the smooth stone. The concept of sentimental value is considered irrational. Yet here you are, holding that stone with such care, Maya observed. What are you feeling? Tahlin considered the question, allowing himself to experience rather than merely analyze. Connection, he finally said. This stone connects you to a memory, and by sharing it, you connect us both to that moment. It creates a continuity across time and between individuals, She smiled, the expression now familiar and warming. That's exactly it. Emotions create bridges, across time, across space, across differences, even, it seems, across species. As she spoke, their eyes met, and Talin experienced the strongest emotional response yet, a complex mixture of admiration, gratitude, and something deeper he couldn't yet name. Without conscious decision, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. The contact sent waves of sensation through him, but this time he didn't withdraw or analyze. He simply experienced the moment, allowing the emotion to exist without dissection. Maya's fingers intertwined with his. "I believe this is what humans call a breakthrough," she said softly. "Indeed," Tahlin agreed, finding unexpected comfort in the touch. Though the Reasoning Council would use more alarming terminology, the reminder of the Council's imminent intervention hung between them. Observer Keltrin would arrive tomorrow, and their time was running out. "We need to consolidate our findings," Maya said, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. "Prepare a presentation that frames your experiences in scientific terms the Council might accept." Talin nodded, already formulating approaches. "The annual Earth-Hythera Joint Conference is scheduled in 5 days. If we could secure a presentation slot, we could present our findings to both human and Hytheran authorities simultaneously. A public forum would make it harder for the Council to simply dismiss the research or quietly recalibrate you." Maya agreed. "But will Keltrin allow you to participate once he arrives?" "Observer status grants monitoring authority, but not direct control over research activities. If I frame the presentation as essential to my official mission, he cannot prevent it without Council consultation." They worked through the night, compiling data, preparing arguments, and constructing a presentation that might convince the Reasoning Council that Tahlin's emotional awakening was not a contamination to be purged, but a discovery to be studied. As dawn broke over New Venice, casting golden light across the ancient canals, they finalized their strategy. Maya looked up from the holographic display, fatigue visible in her eyes, but determination in her voice. "Whatever happens, Tahlin, I want you to know that working with you has been extraordinary. Your courage in facing these changes, in questioning everything you've been taught, it's remarkable." The words triggered a warm expansion in his chest that he now recognized as pride, tinged with something deeper. "The extraordinary element in this equation is you. Maya, without your guidance, I would have reported my initial reactions for correction. You showed me another path." She looked at him with an expression he was still learning to interpret. Tender, yet intense. Joyful, yet serious. "Let's make sure it's a path you can continue to walk." As they prepared to face Observer Keltrin and the challenges ahead, Tahlin realized that regardless of the outcome, he had already been transformed beyond reversal. He had glimpsed a world of experience closed to his people for centuries, and having seen it, he could never again be satisfied with the cold clarity of pure logic. Observer Keltrin arrived precisely on schedule, his tall figure materializing on the research center's transport platform with characteristic Hytheran efficiency. Unlike Talin, who had adapted somewhat to Earth customs during his stay, Keltrin wore the traditional crystalline fiber garments of the Reasoning Council, high-collared and geometrically precise. "Scholar Tahlin," he greeted without preamble, silver eyes assessing. "I trust your research progresses adequately despite the noted anomalies." "Observer Keltrin," Tahlin returned the formal greeting. "Your journey was satisfactory." Efficiency parameters were met. Keltrin surveyed the research center's organic architecture with subtle disapproval. "Your laboratory facilities are acceptable for continued work." They meet all requirements. I have prepared comprehensive research summaries for your review and scheduled appropriate observational sessions. The formality of their exchange masked the tension Tahlin felt, an emotion he now recognized as anxiety. Keltrin was among the Council's most experienced observers, known for detecting the slightest deviations from Hytheran norms. Concealing his emotional development would require perfect control. As they walked toward the research wing, Keltrin spoke again. The Council has reviewed your preliminary findings on human emotional processing. Your focus on music as an emotional catalyst is unusual. Music provides measurable physiological responses that correlate with reported emotional states. Tahlin explained. It offers quantifiable data points for analysis. Indeed, and your personal interest in this Earth acoustic phenomenon, the cello, is purely scientific. The question contained a subtle trap. Keltrin was probing for signs of emotional attachment, disguised as scientific curiosity. The cello produces frequency ranges with notable effects on neural activity. Tahlin replied carefully. My interest is in these measurable effects, which may have applications in Hytheran neural science. Keltrin seemed satisfied with this response, but Tahlin knew the true assessment was just beginning. Over the coming days, Keltrin would observe his interactions, review his research, and monitor his neural patterns for signs of emotional contamination. The first test came that afternoon, when Maya arrived for their scheduled research session. Tahlin had briefed her on observer protocols, emphasizing the need for formal, detached interaction while under Keltrin's scrutiny. Dr. Okafor. Tahlin greeted her with Hytheran reserve. This is Observer Keltrin of the Reasoning Council. He will be monitoring our research procedures. Maya maintained professional composure, though Tahlin could detect subtle signs of tension in her posture. Observer Keltrin, welcome to Earth. I look forward to sharing our comparative emotional research with you. Keltrin acknowledged her with minimal courtesy. Your collaboration with Scholar Tahlin has produced interesting data points. I am curious about your methodologies. The session proceeded with Maya presenting their official research, carefully curated to exclude any mention of Tahlin's personal experiences. Throughout, Keltrin observed with unnerving attention, occasionally asking precise questions that probed for inconsistencies. When Maya demonstrated the emotional response monitoring equipment, Keltrin suggested an immediate practical application. A demonstration would clarify the process, he stated. Scholar Tahlin, as you are familiar with the equipment, you should serve as the subject. Dr. Okafor can explain the human baseline while we observe your Hytheran comparative readings. The request was a calculated test. If Tahlin refused, it would suggest he had something to hide. If he complied, the sensors would likely detect his emotional responses, especially with Maya conducting the demonstration. An efficient suggestion, Tahlin agreed, maintaining outward calm while inwardly calculating risks. Though the comparative value is limited, since I have been exposed to Earth's environment for some time, potentially altering baseline readings. Noted, Keltrin replied. The deviation itself may provide valuable data, with no plausible way to refuse. Tahlin allowed Maya to attach the monitoring sensors. Her fingers brushed against his skin as she placed the neural interfaces, each contact sending small cascades of response through his system. The primary indicators we track are heart rate, pupil dilation, skin conductance, and neural activity patterns. Maya explained professionally as the monitoring system activated. In humans, emotional responses create distinctive signatures across these parameters. On the display screen, Tahlin's physiological readings appeared, outwardly stable and within Hytheran norms thanks to the control techniques he had been practicing. The neural activity, however, was more difficult to disguise. We will now introduce standard emotional stimuli, Maya continued, activating a sequence of images, sounds, and scenarios designed to evoke specific emotional responses. The test proceeded, with Tallien maintaining rigid control over his physiological reactions. But when Maya introduced a brief recording of cello music, the same piece from the concert they had attended, maintaining control became nearly impossible. The memory of that shared experience, combined with the music itself, triggered neural patterns that flashed across the monitor before Tallien could suppress them. Keltron's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Interesting fluctuation in limbic activity, Scholar Tallien, not typical of Hytheran neural patterns. As I mentioned, extended exposure to Earth's environment may create temporary adaptations. Tallien responded smoothly. My research includes self-monitoring of these adaptations, which appear to recede upon return to Hytheran conditions. Before Keltron could probe further, Maya interjected. This adaptation phenomenon is actually the subject of our presentation at the joint conference tomorrow. We've documented similar temporary neural adaptations in several species during cross-planetary exposure. Keltron turned his silver gaze to Maya. I was not informed of any conference presentation. The final schedule was confirmed only yesterday. Tallien explained. As the findings directly relate to my research mission, I determined participation was within established parameters. A barely perceptible tension entered Keltron's voice. The council should have been consulted before such arrangements were finalized. The presentation focuses on established research, Tallien countered. All data has been included in my regular transmissions to the Academy. Nevertheless, Keltron stated, I will need to review the presentation materials before approval can be granted. Of course, Maya agreed readily. We'll provide complete access to our presentation. I'm confident you'll find the research methodology sound and the conclusions well supported. As the session concluded, Tallien knew they had only gained a temporary reprieve. Keltron had detected the anomalies in his neural patterns and would be watching more closely now. The conference presentation was their only hope of presenting their findings before Keltron could report to the council and recommend Tallien's immediate recall. That evening, as they prepared the final version of their presentation in Maya's office, the weight of their situation became fully apparent. He suspects, Maya said quietly, closing the door to ensure privacy. I could see it in his reaction to your neural readings. Yes, Tallien agreed. Keltron is highly experienced in detecting deviations. He will report his findings to the council tonight. Will they order your immediate return to Hythera? Unlikely. The diplomatic protocols between our worlds require formal processes for such actions. They cannot simply extract me without cause that would be recognized by Earth authorities. Maya looked up from the holographic display, her eyes reflecting concern. And our presentation? Will he try to prevent it? He cannot without council authorization, which would require at least 24 hours to process. The conference begins in 18 hours. We have that window. She reached across the table, taking his hand in a gesture that had become natural between them. Then we make it count. If we can present compelling evidence that your emotional responses represent a scientific breakthrough rather than contamination, we might convince at least some council members. Tallien looked at their joined hands, still marveling at how such a simple contact could produce such complex sensations. The council rarely changes established positions, but perhaps individual members might see value in further research before implementing corrective measures. Tallien, Maya said softly, what we're really talking about is your right to your own experiences, your own mind. The council speaks of correction, but what they're proposing is essentially erasing part of who you've become. The truth of her words resonated deeply. He had changed fundamentally during his time on Earth, evolved in ways the Hytheran evolutionary paradigm had not predicted. The thought of losing these new dimensions of experience was painful. I have accessed aspects of consciousness my people have denied for generations, he acknowledged. Whatever the outcome tomorrow, I cannot regret this awakening. Maya's eyes held his, and in them he saw something that transcended scientific collaboration, a connection that defied the cold logic of his homeworld. Whatever happens, she promised, you won't face it alone. As the night deepened around the ancient city, they completed their preparations for what would either be a revolutionary scientific presentation or Tahlin's last act of defiance against the system that had shaped him since birth. The Earth-Hythera Joint Conference convened in the Grand Chamber of New Venice's Science Academy, a harmonious blend of human warmth and Hytheran precision. Crystalline projectors illuminated a stage of polished wood, while delegates from both worlds filled the audience chamber. Humans in their diverse attire sat alongside Hytherans in uniform crystalline garments, the visual contrast emblematic of their different approaches to existence. From backstage, Tahlin observed the gathering with a mixture of scientific interest and newly developed anxiety. Observer Keltrin had reviewed their presentation materials that morning, finding no technical grounds to prevent their appearance, but clearly suspicious of their true intent. The chamber is at capacity, Maya noted as she joined him. Word of your research has generated significant interest. Tahlin nodded, noting the presence of senior Hytheran officials, including 2 Reasoning Council members who had traveled to Earth for the conference. Their attendance was unexpected and concerning. Additional council representation suggests Keltrin has already reported his observations, he said quietly. Maya followed his gaze to the silver-eyed Hytherans seated in perfect symmetry near the front. Is that good or bad for us? Uncertain. Their presence indicates serious concern, but also provides opportunity for direct appeal. Before Maya could respond, the conference moderator, a respected human scientist named Dr. Eleanor Chen, approached them. Dr. Okafor, Scholar Tahlin, you're scheduled next. The audience is particularly interested in your cross-species emotional research. It's quite the talk of the conference. Thank you, Dr. Chen, Maya replied. We're prepared. As Dr. Chen returned to the stage, Maya turned to Tahlin, her expression serious. This is it. Whatever happens up there. Tahlin, I want you to know that working with you has changed how I understand not just your species, but my own as well. The words triggered a complex emotional response that Tahlin now recognized as a form of human love, not simply the romantic variation, but the deeper connection that transcended conventional categorization. Maya, he said, using her first name without titles or formalities. You have shown me what it means to be fully conscious. Whatever the council decides, that gift cannot be taken away. The moment was interrupted by Dr. Chen's voice announcing their presentation. With a final shared glance, they walked onto the stage. The presentation began according to plan. Maya introduced their research on cross-species emotional adaptation, while Tahlin presented the neurological data showing how exposure to different planetary environments could trigger temporary changes in brain function. These adaptations appear to activate dormant neural pathways, Tahlin explained, his voice steady despite the intensity of the moment. In effect, each species temporarily expands its consciousness to better understand the other. From the audience, one of the Reasoning Council members, an elder named Vorlon, raised a hand. Scholar Tahlin, your data suggests these neural adaptations in Hytherans include activation of the limbic system, areas deliberately suppressed during the Great Purification. Do you contend this activation is beneficial rather than contaminating? The direct question cut to the heart of their argument. Tahlin glanced briefly at Maya, then faced the council member directly. Elder Vorlan, our research indicates these activations reveal neural architecture that was never eliminated from Hytheran biology, merely suppressed. The persistence of these structures across millennia suggests they serve evolutionary purposes our ancestors may not have fully understood. Murmurs spread through the Hytheran delegation. Challenging the wisdom of the Great Purification was unprecedented. Observer Keltrin rose from his seat. Scholar Todlin speaks of theoretical implications, but has failed to disclose that he himself has experienced these adaptations. His own neural scans show concerning patterns consistent with emotional contamination. The accusation hung in the air, creating immediate tension. The human delegates looked confused, while the Hytherans displayed the subtle stiffening that indicated alarm. Talene felt Maya step closer beside him, a gesture of solidarity that gave him unexpected strength. Observer Keltrin is correct, Talene acknowledged, causing another wave of murmurs. I have experienced activation of these neural pathways during my research on Earth. Rather than reporting this as contamination, I chose to study it as a phenomenon, one that may have profound implications for our understanding of Hytheran consciousness. Elder Vorlan's silver eyes narrowed slightly. You deliberately concealed your condition from the Council. I postponed reporting until I had sufficient data to present a complete analysis. Talene corrected, which I am providing now. Maya stepped forward. If I may, the neural changes Scholar Talin has experienced have enhanced his research capabilities rather than diminished them. His understanding of human emotional processes has reached levels impossible through external observation alone. That is precisely our concern, Keltrin interjected. Subjective experience corrupts objective analysis. The foundation of Hytheran science is emotional neutrality. At this, Earth's ambassador Selene rose from her seat in the diplomatic section. With respect, Observer Keltrin, human scientific advancement has never required emotional suppression. In fact, many of our greatest discoveries were driven by curiosity, wonder, and passion, emotions that enhance rather than corrupt the scientific process. The debate was escalating beyond their planned presentation, becoming a fundamental ideological clash between Hytheran and human approaches to consciousness itself. Talene raised a hand, drawing attention back to the stage. Respected delegates, this debate illustrates the very point of our research. Two approaches to consciousness, one embracing emotional experience, one rejecting it, each believing its path superior. But what if both approaches have validity in different contexts? What if Hytherans have sacrificed dimensions of experience that could enhance rather than threaten our civilization? Elder Vorlan studied him with an intensity that would have been described as passionate in a human. You suggest the Great Purification was an error? I suggest it was incomplete, Talene clarified, and perhaps partially unnecessary. The emotional chaos our ancestors sought to eliminate could have been tempered rather than extinguished. The persistence of emotional capacity in our neural architecture suggests our biology itself resists complete suppression. Maya added, Our research shows that when Hytherans experience emotional awakening, it follows patterns of integration and balance, not the chaotic disruption the purification sought to prevent. This suggests your species retains the capacity for emotional experience without the destructive elements your ancestors feared. The chamber had fallen completely silent, both species captivated by the unprecedented discussion. Talene could sense the pivotal nature of the moment, not just for his own fate, but potentially for the future relationship between their worlds. In the silence, he made a decision that violated every protocol of his training. He extended his hand toward Maya, palm up, in full view of the assembled delegates. She understood immediately, placing her hand in his. The contact sent the now familiar cascade of warmth through his system, visible on the neural monitoring display still projected behind them. "This simple contact," Tahlin said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "activates neural pathways supposedly eliminated from Hytheran biology centuries ago. Yet I remain capable of logical analysis, scientific inquiry, and rational discourse. The emotional experience enriches rather than diminishes my consciousness." Elder Vorlan rose slowly from his seat, his ancient eyes fixed on their joined hands. "You are claiming, Scholar Tahlin, that you have developed emotional capacity comparable to humans?" "Not identical, but analogous," Tahlin responded. "And not developed, rediscovered. I believe this capacity lies dormant in all Hytherans, awaiting the right conditions for awakening." The pronouncement created immediate controversy among the Hytheran delegation. Several rose to object, while others appeared intrigued by the implications. Observer Keltron's voice cut through the growing discord. "This demonstration confirms the need for immediate intervention. Scholar Tahlin requires neural recalibration to restore proper function." "I refuse recalibration," Tahlin stated firmly, still holding Maya's hand. "I claim the right to my own consciousness." Ambassador Selene rose again. "Under Earth Hythera diplomatic protocols, forced medical procedures cannot be performed on either species without informed consent, except in cases of contagious disease. Scholar Tahlin's condition presents no danger to others. The legal protection was a temporary shield at best. If returned to Hythera, Tahlin would have no recourse against the Council's procedures. Elder Vorlan, however, surprised everyone. Scholar Tahlin's claim merits further investigation. If emotional capacity remains within Hytheran biology, despite centuries of suppression, this represents a significant scientific discovery." "Elder Vorlan," Keltron objected, "Council doctrine clearly states—" "Council doctrine evolves with new evidence," Vorlan interrupted, a move so unexpected that the Hytheran delegation fell completely silent. "Our commitment is to knowledge, not dogma. If Scholar Tahlin can demonstrate that emotional capacity enhances rather than diminishes Hytheran potential, the Council must consider the implications." The Elder turned his gaze directly to Tahlin. "You will submit to comprehensive study. Scholar Tahlin, not for recalibration, but for documentation. Your experience may provide insights our people have lacked for centuries." The pronouncement wasn't victory, but it was reprieve. Tahlin inclined his head in formal acceptance. "I will cooperate fully with all scientific protocols, Elder Vorlan." As the session concluded, and the delegates began discussing the implications among themselves, Maya leaned close to whisper. "That was incredibly brave." "Not bravery," Tahlin replied softly. "Necessity. Some truths cannot remain suppressed, in societies or in individuals." Their hands remained joined as they left the stage, a visible symbol of the bridge forming not just between two people, but potentially between two fundamentally different approaches to consciousness itself. The weeks following the conference brought unprecedented change to both Tahlin's life and the relationship between Earth and Hythera. Elder Vorlan, acting against Observer Keltron's recommendations, established a special research initiative to study the implications of emotional reintegration in Hytheran consciousness. Rather than being recalled for recalibration, Tahlin was appointed lead researcher of this initiative, working alongside Maya to document and analyze his experiences. Their presentation had divided the Reasoning Council, with traditionalists demanding adherence to established protocols, while progressives saw potential value in exploring this evolutionary throwback. The compromise was a structured research program with careful monitoring and regular reporting, a scientific approach to what many Hitherans still viewed as dangerous contamination. For Tallien, this period brought both external scrutiny and internal discovery. Each day with Maya revealed new dimensions of emotional experience, subtle variations and combinations he was only beginning to categorize. The clinical terminology of his reports contrasted sharply with the lived reality of these experiences, creating a duality he navigated with increasing skill. Human neuroscientists and Hitherran observers documented the changes in his neural architecture, the strengthening of pathways long dormant in his species, the integration of emotional processing with logical analysis. The data revealed something remarkable. Rather than emotions overwhelming logic as Hitherran doctrine predicted, Tallien was developing a hybrid consciousness that enhanced both capabilities. Your decision-making efficiency has actually improved by 17% in complex scenarios, Maya noted during one monitoring session. Emotional context appears to provide shortcuts in situations where pure logic would require exhaustive analysis of all variables. This finding particularly interested Elder Vorlan, who had remained on Earth to personally oversee the research. The Great Purification presumed emotion and logic were mutually exclusive, the Elder observed. Your experience suggests they may be complementary when properly integrated. Not all reactions were positive. Observer Keltron continued to file critical reports to the Council, arguing that Tallien's case was an anomaly that threatened Hitherran stability. Several Council members supported this view, calling for immediate termination of the research and Tallien's return to Hithera for treatment. Ambassador Celine became an unexpected ally, using diplomatic channels to protect the research program. This project has implications for both our species, she argued in joint sessions. Forcing its termination would violate the spirit of our scientific cooperation agreements. Through these political maneuvers, Tallien and Maya continued their work, documenting not just the neurological changes, but the subjective experience accompanying them. Their research expanded to include cultural exchange, exposing Tallien to human art, literature, and music while analyzing his responses. During a private moment in Maya's research office, Tallien reflected on the paradox of his situation. I document these experiences in clinical language for the Council, but the reality defies such categorization. How does one quantify the impact of a sunset, the resonance of music, the significance of this? He reached across her desk, taking her hand in what had become a familiar gesture between them. Maya smiled, the expression now beloved and familiar to him. That's the beauty of it, Tallien. Some experiences can be measured, and others can only be lived. You're learning to do both simultaneously, something neither of our species has fully mastered. 3 months after the conference, their research gained unexpected validation. A young Hitherran scientist named Lysera, inspired by Tallien's public stand, came forward with her own experience of emotional awakening after prolonged exposure to earth music. Her case provided crucial evidence that Tallien's experience was not unique, that emotional capacity indeed remained dormant in Hitherran biology, awaiting specific triggers for activation. With a second documented case, Elder Vorlan finally secured Council approval for a controlled study on Hithera itself, a revolutionary development that would allow willing volunteers to experience monitored emotional awakening under scientific supervision. The breakthrough came as Tallien and Maya were finalizing their most ambitious project, a comprehensive record of emotional experiences they called the Emotional Lexicon. This catalog paired subjective descriptions with neurological data, creating a translation system between human emotional language and Hitherran analytical frameworks. This will serve as a bridge, Tallien explained during the project's presentation to a joint Earth-Hithera scientific committee. Future Hitherans who experience emotional awakening will have a framework for understanding their experiences, preventing the isolation and confusion I initially encountered. The committee, including both human scientists and progressive members of the Reasoning Council, approved the lexicon for official distribution. What had begun as a controversial anomaly was gradually being accepted as a legitimate field of scientific inquiry. For Talene personally, the most profound development was not professional, but deeply personal. His relationship with Maya had evolved beyond scientific collaboration into something neither of their cultures had language to fully describe, a connection that transcended both human romantic conventions and Hytheran collaborative protocols. On a clear evening 6 months after his arrival on Earth, they stood together on a balcony overlooking the ancient canals of New Venice. The setting sun transformed the water into ribbons of molten gold, while the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I received communication from the Academy today," Talene said, his voice carrying new inflections that would have been impossible for him half a year earlier. "The Council has approved my extended research assignment. I will remain on Earth for at least another year." Maya's expression brightened with joy, an emotion Talene could now not only recognize but share. "That's wonderful news. And the emotional integration study?" "Approved as well. Elder Vorlin will oversee the first volunteer group next month. 20 Hytheran scientists will experience controlled exposure to emotional triggers, with our lexicon as their guide." "A revolution in crystal," Maya said, using the phrase that had become associated with this movement among both humans and progressive Hytherans. Talene turned to face her fully, the sunset illuminating his features. In the months on Earth, subtle changes had appeared in his physical presentation. More expressive eye movements, varied facial expressions, relaxed posture, external manifestations of the internal transformation. "None of this would have happened without you," he said softly. "Your patience, your guidance, your willingness to reach across the void between our worlds." Maya stepped closer, her hand finding his with familiar warmth. "You did the hard part. Talene, you questioned everything you'd been taught, risked everything you knew, to embrace something new." "Not new," he corrected gently. "Ancient. These capacities were always within us, waiting to be rediscovered. The truly revolutionary act was not creating something new, but remembering what was forgotten." As twilight deepened around them, Talene reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had arrived on Earth as a scientist, seeking to understand human emotions as external phenomena. He would remain as something neither world had quite seen before, a bridge between two forms of consciousness, proof that logic and emotion could not merely coexist, but enhance each other. "What comes next?" Maya asked, her voice blending with the gentle sounds of water below. Talene considered the question, appreciating its multiple dimensions. She was asking about their research, about the Hytheran awakening movement, about their personal relationship, all intertwined threads of a future still unfolding. "We continue writing the lexicon," he replied. "Not just for Hytherans learning about emotions, but for humans learning about integrated consciousness. Both our species have something to teach and something to learn." He looked up at the evening sky, where both Earth's moon and the distant ice-blue point of Hythera were now visible. "And perhaps, in time, we create not just understanding between our worlds, but a new way of being that honors both traditions." Maya followed his gaze upward, her hand still warm in his. "A crystal heart with a human pulse. An apt metaphor." Talene agreed, experiencing the resonance of poetic language, another gift from his time on Earth. As night embraced the ancient city, they remained together on the balcony, two figures from different worlds creating something unprecedented between them. In the crystal spires of distant Hythera, Others would soon begin their own journeys of discovery, guided by the path Tahlin had pioneered. The emotional lexicon would grow with each new experience, each new awakening, creating a bridge not just between species, but between aspects of consciousness long artificially separated. What had begun as an anomaly, a single Hytheran experiencing forbidden emotions, was becoming the foundation for a more complete understanding of sentient experience itself, in the space between stars, in the connection between two people from worlds apart. Something new was being born, not a rejection of either heritage, but an integration that honored both the crystal clarity of Hytheran logic and the warm complexity of human emotion. And as Tahlin stood beside Maya in the gathering darkness, he felt the resonance of both traditions within him, a harmony he could once not have imagined, but now could not imagine living without. The crystal heart had learned to beat, and its rhythm would echo across two worlds for generations to come.